You will inherit nothing. My grandmother's cold voice echoed through the mansion as she pointed at me with a trembling finger covered in diamond rings. After everything I sacrificed for this family, after all the years I've supported you, I'm writing you out of my will completely. Your cousin Derek will get it all. Every single penny, every property, every share of stock. You've betrayed this family's legacy, and now you'll pay the price. Welcome to Blacktail Story. I bring you powerful, emotional life stories every single day. Stories that will make you think, make you feel, and maybe even change how you see the world. If you enjoy raw, honest journeys through the darkest and brightest moments of human experience, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Your support means everything to me and helps me continue sharing these tales. Now, let me take you back to where my nightmare began, to the moment my entire life shattered into a million pieces. Trust me, you'll want to hear every word of how this ends, because the journey from that devastating moment to where I stand today is unlike anything you've ever heard. The chandelier above the dining table sparkled like 1,000 tiny suns, each crystal catching the light and throwing rainbows across the silk wallpaper. But despite all that brilliance, all that beauty, I felt nothing but cold. A deep, bone-chilling cold that had nothing to do with the November weather outside, and everything to do with the ice in my grandmother's eyes as she looked at me. My grandmother, Vivian Ashford, sat at the head of the mahogany table like a queen on her throne. At 82 years old, with her silver hair pulled back in a perfect chignon and her posture as straight as it had been in her youth, she still commanded every room she entered. Her presence was like gravity itself, pulling everyone's attention, demanding respect and obedience. Around the table sat the rest of my family, my parents, Marcus and Helen Ashford, both looking anywhere but at me. My Uncle Richard and his wife Patricia, their faces carefully neutral. And their son, my cousin Derek, who couldn't stop smirking. That smirk told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. This was planned. This was an execution. I had just returned from 3 years in Kenya, working with Doctors Without Borders. 3 years of 16-hour days in mobile clinics, treating malaria, cholera, malnutrition, and diseases that most Americans had never even heard of. 3 years of living in conditions that would make most people weep. Sleeping in tents, bathing with a bucket of water, eating rice and beans until I dreamed about them. I'd left behind my comfortable life in New York, my trust fund privileges, my luxury apartment, everything to help children who had nothing. Children whose parents walked for 3 days just to reach our clinic. Children who would die without our help. I thought my family would be proud. I thought they would understand that I'd used my medical degree for something meaningful, something that mattered beyond profit margins and stock portfolios. Instead, I walked into an ambush. "Your mother tells me you've been living in mud huts," Vivian said, her diamond necklace glinting as she leaned forward. Each word was enunciated with perfect diction, the result of decades of finishing schools and high society. Wasting your medical degree on people who can't even pay you, people who have nothing to contribute to society. Meanwhile, Derek here has been building the family business, taking care of me, being present for this family when it mattered most. Derek straightened his Armani tie, that infuriating smile never leaving his face. He was 32, 2 years older than me, and had spent his entire life perfecting the art of manipulation. He knew exactly what to say, when to laugh at grandmother's jokes, when to offer his arm, how to position himself as the dutiful, devoted grandson. He'd been playing this game since we were children, and he'd gotten very, very good at it. "Grandmother," I started, keeping my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart. "I was saving lives. Children who would have died without medical care. Children with treatable conditions who simply had no access to doctors or medication. I was using my skills to make a real difference in." She slammed her hand on the table. The silverware jumped. The wine in the crystal glasses rippled like a small earthquake had struck. "Don't you dare lecture me about saving lives, Natasha Marie Ashford. Don't you dare sit at my table and pretend you're some kind of saint. Your grandfather built a pharmaceutical empire from nothing. We've saved more lives than you ever will with your charity work, your poverty tourism, your self-righteous crusade. But you turned your back on that legacy. You spat on everything this family represents." The words hit me like physical blows. I glanced at my mother, hoping for support, for any sign that she would defend me. But Helen Ashford kept her eyes fixed on her untouched plate of roasted duck. My father, Marcus, usually so confident and commanding in his role as CFO of Ashford Pharmaceuticals, suddenly found his wine glass fascinating. Derek's hand, you see, had been on the company's pulse. Derek had been attending board meetings, learning the business, making connections. Derek understood what it meant to be an Ashford. "But you," Vivian continued, her voice dropping to something even more dangerous than her earlier rage. "You chose strangers over your own blood." "They're not strangers, grandmother. They're human beings. They're mothers watching their children die from diseases that cost pennies to cure. They're—" "Enough!" Vivian's voice cracked like a whip. "I'm changing my will tomorrow. Derek will receive the estate, the company shares, the properties in Manhattan, the Hamptons, Aspen, all of it. You'll get your grandmother's jewelry collection, the pieces I inherited from my mother. That's more than you deserve, but I'm not completely heartless." Derek's wife, Melissa, couldn't hide her satisfaction. Her hand went to her neck, where she was probably already imagining a particular diamond necklace she'd coveted for years. Melissa was a former model who married Derek for his prospects, and those prospects had just become spectacularly brighter. My Uncle Richard cleared his throat uncomfortably, but said nothing. Everyone in this family had learned long ago that contradicting Vivian Ashford was not just futile, it was dangerous. The jewelry collection, while valuable, was worth perhaps $2 million. The rest of the estate, the properties, the company shares, the investment portfolios, was worth somewhere north of $300 million. Grandmother wasn't just cutting me out, she was making a statement. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the marble floor. The sound echoed in the enormous dining room, like a gunshot, sharp and final. Every eye turned to me. I could feel them waiting for me to beg, to plead, to promise I'd change. "If that's your decision, grandmother, then I accept it." My voice was calmer than I felt. My hands were shaking, but I kept them at my sides. I didn't go to Kenya for an inheritance. I didn't save lives because I thought it would impress you or earn me a bigger trust fund. I went because I actually wanted to help people, not just profit from their suffering. "How dare you!" Vivian hissed, rising from her chair. Half the faces around the table looked shocked. No one spoke to Vivian Ashford that way. "How dare you suggest that this family, that your grandfather's life work was about profiting from suffering? We provide medications that save millions of lives, at prices that millions more can't afford, I replied. I'd seen it firsthand, grandmother. People dying because they couldn't afford the medications our company manufactures. Medications that cost dollars to produce, being sold for hundreds or thousands. That's the legacy you're so proud of. Get out. Her voice was quiet now, deadly. Get out of my house, and don't come back unless you're ready to apologize and beg for my forgiveness. I walked out of that mansion into the autumn rain, knowing I had just lost my family's fortune. My parents didn't follow me. No one did. The heavy door closed behind me with a final, condemning thud, and I stood there in the rain, watching water drip from the marble lions that guarded the entrance. And I cried. But I had no idea that this moment, this terrible, painful moment, was exactly what needed to happen. I had no idea what I was about to gain. 6 months passed like a strange, disconnected dream. I found a small studio apartment in a neighborhood my family would never visit. A 5th-floor walk-up with radiators that clanged all night and neighbors who played music until 3 a.m. I took a position at County General Hospital, working in the emergency department. The pay was a fraction of what I could have earned in private practice, probably less than Derek spent on shoes in a month. But the work mattered. Every shift was chaos. Gunshot victims bleeding out on gurneys, drug overdoses, young people with their whole lives ahead of them, dying from fentanyl-laced pills. Homeless patients with frostbite and infected wounds, coming to us because we were the only place that couldn't turn them away. Uninsured families bringing children with fevers, terrified of the bill, but more terrified of losing their child. It was exhausting, it was heartbreaking, but it was honest work, real work. My mother called occasionally, awkward conversations where she'd ask about my job and I'd ask about the family. Through these stilted exchanges, I learned that Derek had moved into the guest house on grandmother's estate, a charming cottage that was larger than most people's actual homes. He was attending board meetings at Ashford Pharmaceuticals, sitting in on strategy sessions, basically being groomed as the crown prince. According to Mom, Vivian's health was excellent. She was still swimming laps every morning, still hosting her society luncheons, still sharp as ever. There was no urgency, no rush. Derek had all the time in the world to prove himself worthy. I tried not to think about it. I tried to focus on my patients, on the work, on building a life that meant something beyond money and status. But late at night, in my tiny apartment with its clanging radiators, I'd sometimes wonder if I'd made the right choice, if my pride, my principles, had cost me everything. Then one Friday evening, as I was leaving the hospital after a 16-hour shift that had included 3 cardiac arrests, 2 stabbings, and a child who'd swallowed drain cleaner, my phone rang. I was so exhausted I almost didn't answer. Unknown number. Dr. Ashford? A professional female voice said, crisp and efficient. Speaking. This is Margaret Chen, your grandmother's attorney. I need you to come to my office tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. It's urgent. It concerns Mrs. Ashford's estate. My heart sank. My first thought was that this was it. The official notification that I'd been disinherited. Maybe grandmother wanted me to sign papers, to make it legal and final. Or maybe my exhausted brain suggested she'd had a change of heart. Is grandmother? She's alive, Miss Chen interrupted. But there's been a development. Please come alone and tell no one about this call. No one, Dr. Ashford. Not your parents, not your cousin, no one. The line went dead, Before I could ask any more questions, I barely slept that night. I kept replaying that dinner in my mind. Grandmother's cold fury, Derek's satisfied smirk, my parents' cowardly silence. I kept thinking about the last time I'd seen Vivian, 6 months ago, and how she'd looked at me like I was a stranger, like I was a disappointment she could barely stand to acknowledge. Had she changed her mind? Was this some final insult, a way to officially disinherit me in person, to make me sign away any claim to the family? Or maybe, just maybe, she'd realized that Derek wasn't the golden grandson he pretended to be. The law office was in one of those old buildings downtown, all dark wood paneling and leather chairs that creaked when you sat in them. Oil paintings of stern-looking judges lined the walls. The receptionist, a young woman with perfect makeup, directed me to a conference room where Margaret Chen waited. Margaret was a small Asian woman in her 60s with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to look right through you. She wore a perfectly tailored suit, and her handshake was firm and businesslike. "Thank you for coming, Dr. Ashford. Please sit." She closed the door and locked it. That simple action made my stomach drop. Whatever this was, it was serious. Margaret opened a thick folder on the conference table, the kind of folder that holds a lifetime of documents. "Your grandmother came to see me 8 months ago," she began, 3 months before your disagreement at dinner. She wanted to make changes to her will, but not the changes she discussed with your family that evening. I leaned forward, confused. "What do you mean?" Margaret pulled out a document covered in legal language. "Your grandmother was dying, Dr. Ashford. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. She'd been diagnosed a year before you returned from Kenya. The doctors gave her 12 to 18 months to live." I felt the air leave my lungs. The room seemed to tilt. "What?" "She didn't want anyone to know." Margaret's voice was gentle now, understanding. She swore me to absolute secrecy. She wanted to see how her family would behave if they thought she was healthy, if they thought they had years, even decades, to prove themselves worthy of her legacy. So the dinner, my voice was barely a whisper, my disinheritance, was a test. Margaret's expression softened slightly. "A cruel one, perhaps, but your grandmother was not a sentimental woman. She was a businesswoman to her core, and she treated her legacy like a business decision. She wanted to see who would stand by their principles when there was nothing to gain, and who would scramble for scraps like animals at a feeding trough. And Derek performed exactly as she expected. Margaret pulled out another folder, this one even thicker. He moved into the guest house within a week of that dinner, started making plans for the company, talking to board members about his vision for Ashford Pharmaceuticals' future, treating your grandmother like a walking ATM who existed only to fund his lifestyle. He never once asked about her health or her happiness or her wishes for the company. Only about his inheritance, about when certain trusts would vest, about which properties he'd get. Margaret slid a sealed envelope across the table. It was heavy, expensive paper with a wax seal bearing my grandmother's initials. "Your grandmother passed away 4 days ago, Tuesday morning, in her sleep. Peaceful, according to the hospice nurse. The funeral is tomorrow at 11 a.m. at the family plot. This," she tapped the envelope, "is her real will, the one she made 8 months ago with me. You are the sole heir, Dr. Ashford. Everything goes to you. The houses, the stocks, the company shares, the investment portfolios, the art collection, everything, with one condition. My hands shook as I reached for the envelope. What condition? You must expose Derek for what he really is. Margaret's eyes hardened. Your grandmother discovered, through private investigators she hired, that Derek has been embezzling from the company for 2 years. She has all the evidence meticulously documented. She wants you to bring him to justice, to show the world who he really is beneath that charming smile. Inside the envelope was a USB drive and a letter in my grandmother's precise, elegant handwriting. I recognized it immediately. She'd written me letters when I was in boarding school, notes of encouragement and advice. But this letter was different. My dear Natasha, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've passed my test. I know that dinner 6 months ago hurt you. I saw it in your eyes when you walked out, and it broke my heart. But I had to know. I had to be certain that you were strong enough for what comes next. That you had the backbone to stand by your principles even when it cost you everything. Derek is a thief and a liar. The USB drive contains proof of his crimes. Bank records, forged signatures, shell companies, kickbacks. 2 years of systematic theft totaling over $3 million. He thought he was clever, but my forensic accountants are better. The company, the estate, the properties, the investments, everything is yours now. Not because you're my granddaughter, but because you earned it. You left comfort and privilege to help people who could never repay you. You stood up to me when everyone else in this family has spent decades cowering. You chose principle over profit. And that's the kind of person who should control the Ashford legacy. Don't let sentiment stop you from doing what's right with Derek. He's a cancer in this family, and cancers must be cut out. Be strong, my darling girl. Be fierce. Make me proud. Your proud grandmother, Vivian. P.S. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you I was dying. I'm sorry I couldn't hold you one last time and tell you how extraordinary you are. But if I'd shown any favoritism, Derek would have known something was wrong. He's stupid, but he's observant when it comes to money. I love you, Natasha. I always have. I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Margaret sat quietly, letting me process, letting me grieve. She was dying the whole time. I whispered. When I came back from Kenya, she was already dying. Yes, and she knew Derek would pounce like a vulture. She wanted to see if he'd show any genuine care for her, any real love. But he never did. It was always about the money, the status, the power. And my parents? Did they know? No one knew except me and the medical team. Your grandmother was very good at hiding pain. The funeral was at the family plot in Westchester, a cold November morning with steel gray skies threatening snow. Generations of Ashfords were buried there, going back to the 1800s when my great-great-grandfather had made his first fortune in shipping. The plot was surrounded by ancient oak trees, their bare branches reaching toward the sky like skeletal hands. I stood at the back of the crowd, behind cousins I barely knew and business associates who'd come to pay their respects. I watched Derek play the grieving grandson. He wore an expensive black suit, probably custom-made, and dabbed at his eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. His performance was Oscar-worthy. He shook hands, accepted condolences, spoke eloquently about how much grandmother had meant to him. Melissa clung to his arm in a black Chanel dress, already carrying herself like the lady of the manor she thought she was about to become. She whispered to other wealthy women about how devoted Derek had been, how he'd given up so much to care for Vivian in her final months. My parents spotted me and looked away, ashamed. They knew they'd failed me. My mother's eyes were red from crying, but I couldn't tell if she was mourning her mother-in-law or the loss of her relationship with me. Uncle Richard gave me a curt nod. Aunt Patricia pretended not to see me at all. Derek didn't even notice I was there. Why would he? I was the disinherited granddaughter, irrelevant to his plans. The service was beautiful. A string quartet played Vivian's favorite pieces. The minister spoke about her philanthropy, her business acumen, her devotion to family. If he only knew the truth about that last one, I thought bitterly. After the casket was lowered, after the final prayers were said, Margaret Chen approached the family with her briefcase. She looked like an executioner approaching the gallows. If the immediate family could gather at the estate in 1 hour, we'll be reading Mrs. Ashford's will. This is standard procedure, and all interested parties should be present. Derek's eyes lit up. He couldn't hide it. This was his moment, the culmination of years of manipulation and months of blatant sycophancy. He probably already had plans for every penny, every property. He squeezed Melissa's hand, and they exchanged a look of triumph. We assembled in the library at grandmother's estate, that same room where she used to read to me as a child. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves held first editions and rare manuscripts. A marble fireplace dominated one wall, with a portrait of my grandfather above it. He died when I was 10, but I remembered his kindness. How different he'd been from Vivian's cold calculation. Derek sat in grandmother's favorite chair, a wingback upholstered in burgundy velvet. Already claiming his throne, Uncle Richard and Patricia flanked him like courtiers. My parents sat to the side, uncomfortable but silent. Melissa perched on the arm of Derek's chair, one possessive hand on his shoulder. I stood near the door, as if ready to make a quick exit. Margaret opened her briefcase with deliberate slowness. She pulled out a thick document bound in blue legal paper. The last will and testament of Vivian Elizabeth Ashford. She began in her crisp attorney voice. I, Vivian Elizabeth Ashford, being of sound mind and body at the time of this document's creation. Derek was practically bouncing with excitement. His leg chiseled nervously. Melissa was smiling. Hereby leave my entire estate, including all properties, company shares, financial assets, investment portfolios, art collections, jewelry, and personal effects, to my granddaughter, Dr. Natasha Marie Ashford, in recognition of her service to humanity, her unshakable integrity, and her embodiment of the principles upon which this family was truly founded. The silence was deafening. Absolute, total. Like the world had stopped spinning. What? Derek shot to his feet so fast the chair rocked back. That's impossible! She changed the will 6 months ago. I was there. We all heard her. She said I'd inherit everything. She said Natasha was disinherited for abandoning the family. You heard what she wanted you to hear, Margaret said calmly, unruffled by his outburst. This will was executed 8 months ago and has been in my secure possession ever since. It is notarized, witnessed, and completely legal. It supersedes any verbal statements Mrs. Ashford may have made. Derek's face went from white to red to an alarming shade of purple. His hands clenched into fists. This is a mistake. There's been some kind of fraud. I'll contest this. I'll take this to court. You'll do nothing, Margaret interrupted, her voice dropping to something dangerous. "In fact, Mr. Derek Ashford, you're gonna sit down right now and listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. Because what comes next determines whether you spend the next decade in prison or merely disgraced and bankrupt." Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Uncle Richard stood up. "Now wait just a minute." "Sit down, Richard," Margaret snapped. "You're not going to want to miss this." She pulled out a laptop and turned it toward the room. The screen showed spreadsheets, bank records, complex financial transactions highlighted in yellow. "For the past 2 years," Margaret continued, "you've been systematically stealing from Ashford Pharmaceuticals, shell companies registered in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. Fake vendors billing for services never rendered. Kickbacks from suppliers in exchange for inflated contracts. Your grandmother knew about all of it. She hired the best forensic accountants in New York to document everything." "That's a lie," Derek stammered, but his face had gone pale again. "I would never. I've been nothing but loyal to this family, to the company." "Really?" Margaret clicked to another screen. "This is Sterling Pharmaceutical Solutions, registered in Delaware 2 years ago. You're listed as the beneficial owner. This company has billed Ashford Pharmaceuticals $1.8 million for consulting services that never existed." Derek sank back into the chair. Melissa's hand fell from his shoulder. "And this," Margaret continued, clicking through more documents, "is Prestige Medical Supplies, another shell company. $900,000 in fake invoices for equipment that was never delivered. And this is Atlantic Healthcare Partners, $600,000 in kickbacks from suppliers you steered contracts to. Suppliers who charged 30% more than competitors." The room was silent, except for the clicking of Margaret's keyboard. Derek's lawyer started to stand up, then thought better of it and sat back down. "The total comes to $3.2 million stolen from company coffers over 24 months. Mrs. Ashford wanted to give you a chance to confess and return the money. She waited, hoping you'd show some integrity, some remorse. Instead, you spent the last 6 months of her life playing the devoted grandson while planning to gut the company the moment you inherited it." She turned the laptop further. On the screen was an email chain, messages between Derek and someone named James Chen. "This is your correspondence with James Chen, CEO of Harmony Pharmaceuticals, our largest competitor. You've been selling them proprietary information about our drug development pipeline, giving them a competitive advantage in exchange for cash payments and a promised executive position once you'd run Ashford into the ground." Derek's hands were shaking now. Uncle Richard looked like he might be sick. Aunt Patricia was crying quietly. My mother had her hand over her mouth in horror. My father's face was unreadable, but his jaw was clenched tight. "This isn't just embezzlement," Margaret said. "This is corporate espionage. This is betrayal of fiduciary duty. This is fraud on a massive scale. And this," she said, pulling out her phone and pressing a button, "is the police." The library door opened. 2 detectives walked in, shields prominently displayed. One was a heavy-set man with gray hair. The other, a younger woman with sharp eyes. "Derek Ashford," the male detective said. Derek tried to run. He actually tried to run. He bolted for the French doors that led to the garden. But the female detective was faster. She caught him in 3 steps, twisted his arm behind his back, and slammed him face first into the bookshelf. Rare first editions rained down around them. "Derek Ashford, You're under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, corporate espionage, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The handcuffs clicked shut with a sound I'll never forget, sharp and final. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You can't do this, Derek screamed as they hauled him upright. I'm family. This is a family matter. Natasha, tell them. Tell them this is all a mistake. This is just a misunderstanding. Please. I stood up slowly and walked across the room. Everyone watched me. I stopped directly in front of Derek, looking him in the eyes. You told me I wasted my medical degree helping people who couldn't pay me. You called my work in Kenya meaningless, poverty tourism. You laughed at me for choosing service over status. But I learned something there, Derek. I learned that character isn't what you say in public or how you perform for an audience. It's what you do when no one's watching, when there's no reward except your own conscience. I stepped closer. He tried to back away, but the detective held him firm. You failed that test every single day. You stole from your own family. You betrayed the company your grandfather built. You spent 2 years lying to everyone while pretending to be the golden grandson. And you did it all for money, for status, for things that mean nothing. Derek's eyes filled with tears. Real tears this time, not the fake ones he'd shed at the funeral. Please, Natasha, we're family. You know me. This isn't who I am. Actually, Derek, I said quietly, this is exactly who you are. This is who you've always been. I was just too busy saving lives to notice. The detectives dragged him toward the door. He fought every step, screaming and cursing. Melissa was crying now, not for him, but for herself, for the mansion and money that had just evaporated. She didn't even try to follow him to the police car. She just sat there, calculating her next move, wondering who else she could marry. Uncle Richard stood up, his face gray. Natasha, we didn't know. You have to believe us. We never knew he was stealing. Maybe you didn't, I said, or maybe you just didn't want to know. Either way, I suggest you leave now. They filed out one by one, Uncle Richard and Aunt Patricia avoiding my eyes. Melissa already on her phone, probably calling her divorce attorney. Derek's lawyer muttering about appeals and due process. Only my parents remained. My mother was crying openly now. My father stood by the fireplace, staring at his father's portrait. Natasha, my mother began, her voice breaking. We should have supported you. At that dinner, when your grandmother said those terrible things, we should have stood up for you. We should have said something. We were cowards, and we're so sorry. I looked at them. These two people who'd given me life, but failed to give me the support I'd needed when it mattered most. Yes, I said simply. You should have. My father turned from the portrait. He looked older than I remembered, tired and defeated. Your grandmother tested all of us, he said. Not just you and Derek. She wanted to see if any of us would do the right thing. And we all failed, except you. What do you want me to say, Dad? That it's okay? That I forgive you? I crossed my arms. You chose silence when I needed you to speak. You chose comfort over courage. Those are your choices to live with, not mine to absolve. We'd like to try, my mother said, to rebuild, to have a relationship with you again, if you'll let us. I sighed. The anger I'd carried for 6 months was still there, but it was exhausted anger now, tired and worn. Maybe, I said. Someday. But not today. Today I need you to leave, so I can process all of this. They left without arguing. And then I was alone in the library with Margaret Chen. She closed her laptop and began packing her briefcase. Your grandmother left you detailed instructions about the company, the properties, everything. There's a letter for you in the safe upstairs, along with her jewelry collection. Take your time, Dr. Ashford. This is a lot to absorb. After she left, I walked through the mansion slowly, seeing it with new eyes. This had been my grandmother's kingdom, and now it was mine. Every room held memories. Learning to play piano in the music room, reading in the window seat of the library, baking cookies with the cook in the massive kitchen. I found the safe in grandmother's bedroom, hidden behind a painting of the Ashford family tree. The combination was my birthday. Inside was a small velvet box and another letter. The box contained her wedding ring, a simple gold band worn smooth by decades of wear. The letter was short. Natasha, if you're reading this, I'm truly gone now. I hope you understand why I did what I did. I hope you can forgive a manipulative old woman for putting you through hell. The company is yours. Use it to do what I couldn't. Make medicine affordable. Help people who need it most. Prove that profit and principle can coexist. This ring was my most precious possession, not because of its value, but because of what it represents. A lifetime of partnership with a man I loved deeply. Wear it and remember that real wealth isn't money or property. It's love, integrity, and the positive impact you leave on the world. I'm proud of you, my darling girl. I always was. Love, Grandmother. I slipped the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. The next few months were a blur of activity. Derek's trial was swift. The evidence was overwhelming, documented by the best forensic accountants money could buy. The prosecution presented emails, bank records, testimony from co-conspirators who turned state's evidence. Derek's lawyer tried every trick, claimed Derek was being framed. That the stress of caring for his dying grandmother had led to poor decisions. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. 7 years in federal prison. Melissa divorced him before the sentencing, already hunting for her next wealthy mark. She tried to get a settlement from the family, but prenup was ironclad. She walked away with nothing. Uncle Richard and Aunt Patricia retired to Florida, too ashamed to show their faces in New York society. I never heard from them again. The company board met the following week. I walked into the conference room in my scrubs, coming directly from a hospital shift where I'd spent 6 hours in surgery, putting a teenager back together after a gang shooting. The executives in their $3,000 suits looked at me like I was a visitor from another planet. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Dr. Natasha Ashford, your new majority shareholder and chairman of the board. I understand you're used to a certain way of doing business. That ends today. The CEO, a man named Bradford, who'd worked with my grandfather, leaned back in his chair with a patronizing smile. With all due respect, Dr. Ashford, you're a physician, not a businesswoman. Perhaps you should leave the running of the company to those of us with experience. I cut him off. With all due respect, Bradford, you've been overpaying yourself and under-delivering for years. You're fired. Security will escort you out after this meeting. His face went red. You can't. I can and I am. I placed a folder on the table. This is a plan developed by consultants I've hired. Actual experts in pharmaceutical operations and healthcare economics. We're implementing it immediately. The plan was radical. 25% of profits would go to a foundation providing free medications to underserved communities. We'd cap executive salaries at 20 times the median employee wage. We'd increase worker benefits and profit sharing for all employees, not just management. We'd commit to transparent pricing and refuse to engage in price gouging or monopolistic practices. Any hint of fraud or unethical behavior would result in immediate dismissal and prosecution. Half the board resigned on the spot, unwilling to accept reduced pay and increased accountability. Good. I replaced them with people who actually cared about medicine over money. Physicians, ethicists, patient advocates, and yes, some business people, but ones with integrity. The business press predicted disaster. Forbes ran an article titled, "Heiress Runs Pharmaceutical Giant into the Ground with Naive Idealism." The Wall Street Journal questioned my competence. CNBC brought on analysts who explained why prioritizing patients over profits would bankrupt the company within a year. They were all wrong. Turns out people actually want to work for a company with values. Applications to work at Ashford Pharmaceuticals tripled. Employee satisfaction skyrocketed. Productivity increased. Innovation flourished when researchers weren't pressured to cut corners or rush products to market. And the foundation? The Ashford Foundation became the largest provider of free medications in underserved communities across the U.S. and in developing nations. We provided insulin to diabetics who'd been rationing doses. We gave antibiotics to children whose parents couldn't afford prescriptions. We made HIV medications available in African countries where the disease had been a death sentence. The press changed their tune. Suddenly, I was a visionary, a humanitarian, a model for ethical capitalism. Harvard Business School wanted to do a case study. I declined. This wasn't about publicity or praise. This was about doing what was right. 6 months after taking over the company, I stood in a hospital in Guatemala, training local doctors on emergency procedures. The Ashford Foundation had funded the entire clinic, a modern facility with equipment and medications those doctors had only dreamed of having. On my finger was grandmother's emerald ring, the one she'd worn every day, catching the tropical sunlight and throwing green sparkles across the white walls. My phone buzzed with a video call. It was Margaret Chen. "Thought you'd want to know," she said, her face serious on the screen. "Derek filed an appeal. It was denied this morning. He'll serve his full 7-year sentence. No parole for at least 5. "Good," I said. "Has he shown any remorse?" According to the prison counselor, he spends most of his time complaining about how unfair his situation is and blaming you for his choices. Of course he does. People like Derek never accept responsibility. On another note, Margaret continued, the company quarterly report just came out. Profits are up 12% despite, or perhaps because of, your ethical reforms. The stock price hit an all-time high yesterday. I laughed. Turns out doing the right thing can also be good business. Who knew? Your grandmother knew. Margaret smiled. She believed that ethics and economics weren't enemies. That the highest form of business success was creating value for everyone, not just shareholders. She just didn't live long enough to prove it. You're proving it for her. After we hung up, I walked back into the clinic where a line of patients waited, in the shade. Mothers holding sick children, elderly people with chronic conditions, young men injured in accidents. These were people who couldn't afford the medications. Derek had stolen money to buy sports cars and designer watches. These were the people my family's company should have been serving all along. I thought about that dinner 6 months ago, when grandmother had looked at me with such cold disappointment and declared me unworthy of the family legacy. She'd been testing me, pushing me to prove that I valued principles over possessions, that I was strong enough to walk away from wealth when my integrity demanded it. And I'd passed without even knowing I was being tested. Not because I fought for the inheritance, but because I was willing to walk away from it completely. That's the difference between people like Derek and people like me. He would do anything to get what he wanted. Lie, cheat, steal, betray. I was willing to lose everything rather than compromise who I was. That's the test, the real test. Not what you'll do to gain something, but what you'll refuse to do, even if refusal costs you everything. 3 years have passed since that day in the library when Derek was arrested. 3 years since I inherited a fortune I never wanted and a responsibility I never imagined I'd have. The Ashford Foundation now operates in 47 countries. We've provided free medications to over 2 million people. We've funded clinics in places where children used to walk 3 days to see a doctor. We've made life-saving treatments affordable for people who'd given up hope. Derek is still in prison, teaching other inmates how to read as part of his rehabilitation program. The prison counselor says he's finally starting to understand the impact of his actions, though. Whether that's genuine growth or just a performance to impress the parole board remains to be seen. I don't really care which. He made his choices, and now he lives with the consequences. Melissa married a hedge fund manager and moved to Connecticut. I see her occasionally in society pages, still chasing wealth and status, never understanding that those things are empty without substance beneath them. Uncle Richard and Aunt Patricia send Christmas cards from Florida. We're not close, but we're civil. Some relationships can't be fully repaired, and that's okay. Not every bridge needs to be rebuilt. My parents and I have slowly, carefully rebuilt our relationship. It took a year of difficult conversations, of me expressing my hurt, and them taking responsibility for their failures. They volunteer at the foundation now, and I see them trying, genuinely trying, to be better people. My father even proposed a resolution to the company board to increase transparency in drug pricing. It passed unanimously. Last week, I received a letter from a young woman in Kenya. Her name was Amara, and I'd treated her for cerebral malaria 3 years ago when she was 14. She was a few days from death when her mother carried her into our mobile clinic. I stayed up with her for 36 hours straight, monitoring her fever, adjusting her medications, refusing to let her slip away. The letter said she'd just been accepted to medical school in Nairobi. She wanted to be a doctor because of the woman who'd saved her life and shown her that medicine could be about service, not just profit. She wanted to come back to her village and help people the way I'd helped her. I keep that letter in my desk drawer right next to grandmother's will and her final letter to me. Those 3 pieces of paper represent everything that matters: the past, the present, and the future. Where I came from, who I am now, and what I'm building for those who come after. Because that's what inheritance really means. Not the money you leave behind or the properties you pass down, but the lives you touch and the values you instill and the change you make in the world that outlasts your own life. Grandmother tested me to see if I was strong enough to carry the family name without being corrupted by the family wealth. She wanted to know if I understood that the Ashford legacy wasn't really about pharmaceuticals or properties or stock portfolios. It was about using the resources we'd been given to make the world better, to help people who couldn't help themselves, to prove that compassion and commerce could coexist, that you could build an empire and still keep your soul. She never knew that I'd learned those lessons long before her test, in places where the Ashford name meant nothing. In villages where the only currency was compassion, and the only inheritance worth having was the knowledge of how to save a life. I passed her test, yes, but more importantly, I passed my own. And that, in the end, is the only inheritance that truly matters. The ability to look at yourself in the mirror and know that you chose principle over profit, people over possessions, integrity over inheritance. Every single time. Thank you so much for watching my story. If this touched your heart, if it made you think about what really matters in life, about the choices we make when no one's watching, and the legacy we leave behind, please hit that like button and subscribe to Blacktail Story for more powerful, emotional journeys every single day. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me what city you're watching from and what time it is there. It amazes me to know you're all out there. From different countries, different time zones, all connected by these stories. What would you have done in Natasha's position? Would you have walked away from the inheritance? Let me know your thoughts. If you'd like to support the channel and help me continue bringing you these stories, there's a donation link in the description. Every bit helps me keep creating content for you. And now, 2 of my most popular stories will appear on your screen. Choose one and keep the journey going. Thank you for being part of this community, for listening, for caring, for being here. Until tomorrow, remember, your true inheritance isn't what others give you. It's what you choose to become.